All right. What is up, everybody? RLTKPHX podcast, episode 33. I'm here with my boy Alex.
What's up, guys? How's it going?
John decided he was going to take a vacation today, taking a vacation day and all that stuff. So we gave him a pass. And, Alex does a bad job anyway. So we kicked him off the show. So, anyways, strange time we're in right now. A lot of things going on. COVID-19 hit, and then we saw this atrocious death of George Floyd. And obviously, we've been engaging. Like last week, we had a conversation with police officer. Hopefully, you guys saw that and just kind of getting his perspective on what's going on. And I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today. So I want to introduce my friend to you, Caleb. Caleb, what is up?
What's up?
How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Just chilling like a villain.
Hey,
up here in North Phoenix.
Hey, that North Phoenix life, bro.
Speaking
of villains, my homie here has a very unique story.
Yeah.
Which we're going to get into in a second. I'm really excited for this because I think it's going to bring a unique perspective to the conversation that I haven't heard anywhere else. And so let's go ahead and dive in, man. I'm not gonna ruin the surprise, I guess you could say. I want to go ahead and tell us. So, what is your story? Like, where did you grow up? All that stuff. Like, let's get into it.
I was born in Phoenix and raised here most of my life. Lived in Dallas for 6 years. Kind of in the middle childhood, and watched the Cowboys go to 3 Super Bowls. So I'm a huge Cowboys fan. And moved back here when I was roughly junior high school age. And in high school, fell in with a group of neo-Nazi skinheads. And so I gave myself over to that. And I didn't go to college, but kind of in that early young adult phase of life, ran with that crew and fell out of that at a pretty pivotal moment. And at the same time, met Jesus in a real way. And I mean, I grew up in a religious home, but it was very much the churches that my parents would drag me to were very much about do the right thing, abstain from all the drinking and smoking and dancing and stuff, and then maybe God will love you type religion and morality. And I just rejected that kind of in junior high. I just couldn't stand it. I felt like everybody was a hypocrite. But met Jesus roughly the same time, got out of the skinhead game, and through just the discipleship process, had a transformation of my mind and in my heart around issues, all sorts of issues, of course, as Jesus does, touches every aspect of one's life. But specifically for this conversation, transform my concept of diversity and ethnicity and how that matters, and specifically in America around race and racism. And so now I serve as the lead pastor of the church that I met Jesus at. And glad to be with you guys today.
Man, thanks, bro. It's crazy to think about. It's crazy because when I first met you, I had no freaking idea until you told me. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've told us what you do now. And so, to just dive into that a little bit more, you said neo-Nazi skinhead. Obviously, the term being thrown around a little bit more now is white supremacist, right?
Yep. The one is not always the other. So you can certainly be white supremacist without being a neo-Nazi skinhead.
Okay.
But a neo-Nazi skinhead would definitely be a more pronounced version of white supremacy. But white supremacy can take all different types of forms, as we see today. Okay. And it's insidious in its nature, in that it can shapeshift. And what the symptoms of white supremacy, what it maybe used to be, maybe not be the same now. And it takes on all sorts of different manifestations. So as what I consider to be a demonic force that's in the bones of our nation for 401 years, it's insidious in the fact that it just shapeshifts all the time. Wow. And every generation wrestles with being either unable to or willfully choosing not to see its new manifestations.
Wow. So help us, like, when we hear that term white supremacy or neo-Nazi skinhead, like what does that actually mean? Like, what do those terms mean?
Yeah, so neo-Nazi would be kind of a new wave of Nazism, and so a lot of it's modeled after the Third Reich and what you saw rise in the 1930s with fascism. But specifically, a lot of the attire and culture of the Nazi regime gets adopted by neo-Nazi skinheads, and so the way that a person would dress or even behave, obviously giving a salute that I'm sure you've seen on old news footage or in movies. When Hitler would salute, he would do it a certain way. Skinheads do that. A lot of the rhetoric is very similar, and so neo-Nazi would just be kind of a new wave of Nazism. uh, Skinhead, and there's all different types of skinheads, especially if you're around in Europe. There's many different forms. Here in the States, there's different forms of skinheads, and some of them are anti-racist, and some of them it's kind of similar to the punk movement, but generally, at least from what I can tell, generally more violent, and smaller groups or cells that exist similar to gangs. And so neo-Nazi skinhead is a particular type of skinhead, and it's a particular type of group. There are some organizations that are kind of more, regional or national, but for many skinheads, at least when I was running in those circles, we were more independent, and so there was not like a national, you know, committee or anything like that for neo-Nazi skinheads. And then, of course, with white supremacy, there's groups all over the place, but again, they're generally underground, and you'll see them anywhere from urban centers to suburban areas like North Phoenix or where I grew up in Mesa, Gilbert. You also see them in the prison systems, and they're generally interwoven, but usually it's organic by how that works. So when we talk about white supremacy, you can see that in things like the Ku Klux Klan, or you can see it in neo-Nazi skinheads, or all over the place. And it's the working idea that started, centuries ago, that you can, using genetic studies or eugenics, you can subdivide the human race into races. And so the language of Caucasian comes out of that. Other that you might be familiar with, other classifications of persons based on their features. Hmm. And there was a lot of work that was done by the sciences in the 18th and 19th century, to my knowledge, and there was actually multiple different types of classification systems used, similar to what you would see if, I don't know if you guys have ever seen those posters of like the animal kingdom, where all the different animal groups are subdivided into different types and categories. Mm-hmm. There were many books published in the 18th and 19th century that tried to do that to humans based on features, based on classifications. And the idea, of course, and by and large, these books were written by white people. Guess who's at the top of the chain? It's the white folks, the Caucasians. Even in the late 1700s, some of the founding fathers actually bought into the idea of kind of the Nordic class was kind of this elevated class, and you can see that in some of their writings. And so it all stems from this idea, and it has very little to do with the sciences. It was just they were observing differences between people and trying to classify these people into what they called races. And so this is different than ethnicity. Mm-hmm. So with ethnicity, it's like, I'm Irish, I'm Italian, and it has to do with your people that you come from. And within America, there's hundreds of ethnicities represented. And of course, there has been throughout the history of the world ethnocentrism. I mean, you see that everywhere you look in human history. But unique to Western civilization, and really, really pronounced in America, and to my knowledge, also Britain, is this idea of white supremacy, that it's not so much about your ethnicity, it's more about what they ended up calling your race, right? So there's the white race, the black race, this race, the other race. And we stumble upon it, don't we? Like even in our weird classifications now, we have classifications like black and white, but then we have, Latino or Hispanic, which is closer to ethnicity than it is about color, which just shows you that it's just this confusing mix of trying to classify people based on observable differences. And of course, any study of racism in America will tell you that it was all done to maintain control, right? So you need a cheap labor force and you have to justify that somehow. And our founding fathers and those before them found a way to justify it by saying that we've categorized whites as the best and then other groups are subhuman. Therefore we can, subject them to slavery and they can be our property. And it's all scientific and voila, white supremacy.
Wow. That's a lot, bro.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm preaching at you.
No, it's good. It's great. No, thank you. I mean, the audience needs to have absolute clarity on where this whole thing is coming from, or at least parts of what's happening right now is coming from. I guess the question, and maybe it's two-pronged, like why do people buy into this ideology? Like why do people buy into this narrative, into this idea of supremacy? And like I know that probably leads you in as well. Like why did you buy into it, right?
Yeah. So why I got into it was, at a pivotal point in my life, I was told because I was blonde hair, blue-eyed, white, that I was better than everyone else, which just reaffirmed my prejudices that, of course, I'm better than everyone else. Awesome. I'm an awesome person. Everyone should agree that I'm awesome, which is everybody's perspective especially when they're, a teenager, like, I'm better than everybody else. And so here's a group of people that we're better than everyone else. And it's, I think, the natural tendency of the human heart to fall into that. It also gave me a sense of belonging and brotherhood. There was something that bound us together. It gave me safety and security. I was shorter than most people, am shorter than most people. And so just being scared of, people who look different than me, but also are bigger than me, to have a group of people that would have my back and, could be physically violent if we needed to be in order to take care of business. And so it gave me security, it gave me belonging, it gave me purpose, it gave me brotherhood. And it was an easy yes, because I needed all those things to navigate life. And I think the reason why, now I went a pretty pronounced way, right? Neo-Nazi skinhead.
Yeah.
I think there's other versions of it that, again, are more insidious by their hiddenness. But the working idea was, so one of the ways that it does tend to bubble up is if you repeat something over and over again in your community, or your community continues to toe the same line, you just believe it because it's what everyone is saying.
Yep.
For instance, Black people are lazier than white people is a thing that people in white-only communities or social circles propagate simply by saying it out loud enough. And if you grow up in it and you're never shown otherwise, it's like, all right. Anecdotal evidence, like, especially if you don't know the history, but I'll give it to you straight up. Anecdotal evidence, in Phoenix, and this is like if you're in a predominantly white community, we've all noticed that the majority of Black people live in poor areas. Therefore, you could assume that Black people don't love their community as much. They don't take responsibility. Of course, in the 90s, you had the national rhetoric of welfare queen. And of course, in every white person's mind, that was a Black person.
Wow.
And so there's thousands of ways to reinforce the idea without coming outright and saying it. Which, of course, you ask any one of those folks that repeat those things or buy into that, are you a racist? No way. No, I'm not a racist. I've just happened to note that Black people live in poor areas, and therefore I'm going to infer all these negative things. I'll give you a recent example. Just a few days ago, there was a concern that there was going to be looting at the Scottsdale quarters. So North Phoenix, affluent district, got a lot of really affluent stores, restoration hardware, stuff like that. And in social media and on my phone, one of the things that was circulating was a screenshot that of dubious origin, right? A screenshot that said something to the tune of, and it was presented as, look, we found evidence from, you know, the BLM movement or Antifa or whoever it was, definitely a person of color. Of course, there's no name or anything on it, and it's a screenshot that says, let's take the fight to the white people, and let's go to Scottsdale Quarter and you know, Kierland, and rape any white women we see. And that got shared amongst many in the, you know, in my community. Now, again, it feels, I think, to the average person like, okay, like that's dangerous. That could totally happen.
Yeah.
The issue is that how that is framed. If you take a step back and you just think, okay, who in their right mind would say these words? And I could tell you that a favorite rhetorical device of white supremacists, if you wanted to get white supremacists hooping and hollering at a rally, you would say things like this: we got to keep them people out of our country because they're going to take our jobs, so money, and they're going to rape our white women. And that is it's a badge of pride. It's the way you incite people to violence against people of another race, is to say those people. And of course, the inference in that screenshot is black people are inherently more violent than white people, and they're targeting white women. And that's not to say that violence that way happens, but it's something that a community that doesn't think critically about race, or maybe isn't exposed to these ideas, it just gets circulated, right? So you might say, well, hey, that's racist. Well, no, it's not. It's just the facts. I took a screenshot, or somebody sent it to me, and of course, when you try to track down the source, nobody seems to have it.
What a surprise!
But again, it feeds into the narrative. It feeds on my fear, and as I've heard said probably a dozen times over the last week, nothing is more scary than scared white people.
Wow.
Because we can be, you know, as a community in power, when their power comes into check, they can grow violent in order to maintain power or give themselves a sense of security.
Yeah, that's crazy you mentioned that about the screenshot, because I saw it during the week, and that I was kind of thinking what you were saying, because in my mind I'm like, you know, why would people just start throwing that stuff out? Like, are things going to get that crazy? And I was like, I doubt this is probably just something for the media so that, you know, why people can get enraged. And then my sister sent it to me, and she's like, WTF question mark. And I was like, had to slow her down and like walk her through like what everything that was happening and explain to her how these things are made up. But I think you just made a great point on that.
You see the same thing if you look over the last 20 years in our nation. You see the same thing being done towards those of Middle Eastern descent. Things just being posted, things that if they were said about your own child, you would never post, freely being shared on the, you know, generally on social media or through text. And frankly, like just as a pastor and a guy who's trying to follow Jesus, it's nothing more than gossip and slander. Like that, it is trying to defame a people group based on no facts, and it propagates the idea that people that don't look like me are probably going to be more violent, or probably going to be more lazy, or probably going to be more whatever derogatory idea you have in your mind, because they're strange to me, and probably because I don't have any people in my network that I listen to that come from that community.
Yeah, I felt that a lot, especially being a Latino, and with all the living in Arizona with all the immigration stuff going on. Like I follow the Immigration Coalition, and one of the guys that runs it, goes down to the border and gives the Latinos that are in those camps, you know, just diapers and clean clothes and stuff like that. And he's just posting all the hate that he gets for it. Like, why are you loving those people?
Yep.
You know, and the misconceptions of a lot of the things that people say.
That's good. As if those people are less than, right? Because they're at the border. So we shouldn't care about them. We shouldn't give them food. We shouldn't take care of them or any of those types of things. I think the saddest thing for me about it is that I hear those types of things coming from people who would call themselves Christians, right? It's not, it's not just that. Like, if you're not Christian, okay, cool. Like, I fundamentally understand you have a different worldview than me, and you may genuinely think that, like, hey, some people are better than others, and there's no reason why you wouldn't think that. I mean,
Right.
now I know a lot of people who are not Christian who don't think that, right? But to be a Christian and think that, to me, is totally antithetical, right, to the gospel. Like, it's just anti what Christianity is supposed to be, which
Mm-hmm.
is what is so insidious about this thing. Like, it's infiltrated the church, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is supposed to be this institution in society that really impartially cares and loves all people, right? It's what we're supposed to be, and we're not. Um,
Well, not usually. I mean, I think it's wise to give credit to those that are doing the work.
that's fair.
Um, like I think writ large, yeah. But I mean, I think we can see pockets where there's a faithful remnant who are doing the work. Alex, you just mentioned one with was it the National Immigration Roundtable
The
group that you were
Immigration
referencing?
Coalition.
Immigration Coalition. Okay, yeah.
That's good. So, so we kind of mentioned some things here, like kind of swimming in the waters of how this narrative of white supremacy has been developed in our culture and how it's kind of propagated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, how do you feel like? So, obviously, we're in the midst of a massive national conversation. We're in the midst of protests and all those different types of things. And obviously, if you're on social media, you're seeing some very polarizing statements,
Yeah.
conversations, videos. And so, how do you see some of the things that you understand to be true about the white supremacist movement playing out in the conversations that we're having as American people right now?
Hmm. So you can steer me in the right direction if I get off course here. But just in my gut is in response. One of the things is the conflation of protest and riot.
Hmm.
I think in many's mind, as we watch this stuff on a screen, we're not present. For those of us that aren't present, it's easy to merge in our minds rioting and protesting, and it's easy then therefore to dismiss the entire thing.
Yeah.
Those people are just being violent. That's not doing any good. And while I do want justice for Floyd and Ahmaud and Breonna, this isn't helping. Therefore, I don't have to listen anymore. And I think that what can happen is we can fall into the trap of seeing some people being violent give us permission to turn back on our apathy towards what those who are protesting publicly are saying. And so I think it comes with apathy. I think that's oftentimes the form it takes. One of the things, and I really don't like this analogy, but it's the best one I've got. So if you guys can think of a better one, tell me, and I'll use that one. And I certainly don't mean anything to diminish what's going on right now. But to some degree, in the same way with my children, when they're trying to get my attention, they start quiet, right? Dad, 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 right? I don't know. So if you've ever been around kids trying to get their parents' attention, the voice escalates. And if you continue that for a season, many children will then turn to physical action, knocking something off the table, rebelling in some way, doing something that they know they're maybe would be get your attention, right? They're going to knock something off the table to get your attention. And I think as a community, there are many of us who have been hearing the hey, pay attention, hey, pay attention, hey, pay attention, and it's easy to not pay attention to that. And then when the thing gets knocked off the table, so it's like, hello, you got to pay attention. It's easier for us to point at that and be like, look, you're violent, and therefore I'm gonna ignore the whole thing. And you see it with the treatment that Kaepernick got for. I mean, that was a quiet every week. Hey, pay attention. Hey, pay attention. And he got ridiculed for it and lambasted and blacklisted from the NFL and called really gnarly names. And I think that
You know what's crazy about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to see to the degree of vitriol for Kaepernick, after Kobe Bryant died, there was a GoFundMe page that was to buy a helicopter for Colin Kaepernick, and it had hundreds of thousands of dollars. And obviously, the
Wow.
insinuation was, let's buy a helicopter for Colin Kaepernick so we can crash him into a mountain and he'll perish. And like that literally had like $300,000 or $400,000 donated to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's because for many in majority culture, we see protest against things that are broken as anti-American, or you hear the phrase, the language unpatriotic. And we demand allegiance, right? If you don't put your hand over your heart and sing the anthem like the rest of us, we demand it because it's our national religion. And if you don't fall in line, you're a threat to power and the powers that be. And so, and I think as Christians, one of the things that I think that Christians, especially in majority culture in America, need to really think through is to say, God, search me and know me. God, convict me of any aspect of my heart that is aligned more with the kingdoms of this world, namely the kingdom that I'm a part of, that's more aligned with their principles and values than the kingdom of God. Because in America, the idea that Christian is American is so intertwined that we can't separate Christianity from American values. And so anyone who calls into question America or the flag or the national anthem, anyone who does something that might be against that, we generally, majority culture just recoils against it as almost ungodly behavior.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole Drew Brees thing right now, right?
Yes.
Drew Brees went out and made a statement, and then I saw the perfect video on it. Was I don't know who the lady from Fox News is, but back when LeBron said something, she basically said, you know, shut up and dribble. And now you have Drew Brees say something patriotic about the flag, and she's like, "Oh well, you know, I think he's a smart, intellectual person who
He's allowed to talk.
he's allowed to talk." You know,
Yes.
and it's that same behavior, right, that upsets, everyone.
Yeah, anything that's a threat to my prejudices or preconceived notions of the world, I don't want to hear, right? I don't want correction on anything, right? I mean, I remember in high school when I would see the red ink on my math exam. I don't have no time for no red ink. Like, I don't want to be corrected. I'm doing just fine the way I am. And as it relates to racism in America, there are many who are being reminded that it is an issue, but who wants to be corrected and who wants to change in anything, right? In my relationship with my wife, go ahead.
Especially when you have power.
Yeah, I don't want to give up my power. Come on, are you kidding me? Uh, what crazy person would teach you that to find your life you have to lose it? What upside down kingdom would tell me that the way to peace and flourishing is a cross and the one I got to bear? What crazy leader would tell me that the way to be a leader of all is to be a servant to all? I don't want to do any of that stuff. And it's only by the grace of God and the power of his spirit working through me that I might even move in that direction. The natural tendency of the human heart is to accumulate and to maintain more power and influence because we feel good about it. It makes us feel secure, whether that's through money, influence, sex appeal, whatever I can leverage to give my heart a sense of security. Anything that calls that into question, I'm naturally going to fight against. And that's why I think Jesus was so vivid in calling us to wash feet. And I think in a nation that's got a 401-year history with racism, man, the working assumption, I think, of most people in majority culture is that racism is what we see in the movies. It's people in chains on ships in cotton fields. It's lynchings. It's segregated schools, and in our minds, in the public consciousness, that's what is racist. And we don't see those things anymore. Therefore, racism is no longer a problem. And it takes a level of humility and willingness to listen and learn to see that the demon of racism was not excised in the 1960s. It just shapeshifted. And we've got to listen to people of color who are screaming at us. I'm just talking to white people now, who are screaming, "There's a problem." And this is something. So if you have a love relationship with someone who's different than you, so in my life, my wife and I, if my wife comes to me and says, "There's a problem," even if I can't see the problem, even if I don't understand the problem, even if I don't think there is a problem, because I love her and we're in community together, if she says there's a problem, what? There's a problem. And I need to humble myself to listen. The last thing I need to do, if my wife says there's a problem, is pull up some blogger or some YouTube video or some Facebook post that proves my point and show it to her and say, "See, there's no problem." That's not going to get us anywhere. If people in our community that we love say that there's a problem, especially for those of us that are majority culture, we need to humble ourselves and listen and say, even if I can't see the problem, even if I don't understand the problem, even if I don't think there's a problem, if they say there's a problem, and we got to listen.
I think a lot of people struggle with that concept. Even in conversations I've been having today over the past couple of days, weeks, it's very much argumentation in the um, fact, right? Got to have data. It's got to be empirical. It's got to be, you can show me. And then it's way less about, man, there's a whole group of people who are saying the same thing.
Right.
And I think data is good. I think it's great. I think it's needed. I think math and science are good and great and have advanced our world. But to then point to them to the only standard by which we determine anything is, to me, just asinine, plain and simple. And so, like you said, if your wife comes to you and says there's a problem, you're not asking her for data. You're trusting that what she said to you is actually true, and then trying to discover that together and make a decision on what needs to be done next. But what we see in our world is the opposite, right? People want to use data and facts and different things of that nature. And I'm not saying that those things aren't good and right, but they're not the only way by which we understand the world or understand each other. And so what they become is a way to push people away and keep yourself in the same position that you're in. And it's just sad, man. It's really sad to see people doing this to other people. And then on the flip side, when the roles are reversed, all of a sudden everybody's supposed to believe what you say, and everybody's supposed to trust that the words that are coming out of your mouth are valid and true and right. And so, man, so how do you see this playing out? And I'm really interested in this question. How do you see this playing out in the church? Because like I said before, we're supposed to be a different space, and obviously we're speaking generally. And so like this idea of supremacy, I mean, is it playing out in the church? And if it is,
100%. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, how are we seeing it play out?
Yeah. What's normal church?
White church.
White church. So in the public consciousness, if you were to talk about we'll just say the evangelical church, okay? You say that word out loud in the public consciousness, what does everybody imagine? A white pastor in front of a white congregation. It's in the bones. So the demonic force of racism, I'm going to butcher an old quote. I forget who actually originated it. Have you guys ever heard the quote, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is to convince everyone he didn't exist?
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Yeah, so the greatest trick the demonic force of racism ever pulled was convincing a bunch of people it didn't exist, and got everyone normal and comfortable with it. And so this is my like the thing to look at if you want to talk about racism in America, especially in the church. If you ask the majority culture, who are part of a church that is basically full of white people, if they look around and see anything wrong, they won't see anything wrong. If you're in a homogenous church, here, all right, I'll walk you through it. You see, you're going to get me preaching now. This is dangerous.
Come on.
If you read the account of Pentecost, if you read the rest of Acts, if you read the Pauline epistles, so Paul's letters to the churches, you see a multi-ethnic movement. At its core, Christianity is a multi-ethnic movement. You trace it back to Genesis if you want to, and you see that God's blessing on Abraham is for the blessing of the nations. You go to the end of your Bible, you'll see that it is for the nations, that the nations are being brought into the New Jerusalem. Okay. How on earth can I look at an all-white church as I have my Bible open in one hand and I look at my congregation that's all the same people, and there's nothing in me that says something's wrong here? That demon of systemic racism got in the bones that normalized homogenous churches. If you read through your New Testament, you will see that a homogenous church is a broken church.
That's good. That's
you also, I mean, it's on its face value. I mean, if you're, and this is how we talk at Desert Springs. And listen, we're nowhere close to where we need to be. But if your local church is not as diverse as your local Walmart, something is wrong.
That's good.
And we're not preaching on it. We're not identifying that. I mean, if you were in a church family and you saw abuse rates, physical abuse rates increasing, everyone would be screaming and saying something is wrong here. We need to lean into this. But we're not having that conversation. At least we haven't been recently over the last 50 years about the fact that homogeny is, everyone's just okay with it, but there's something wrong. It does not square with the text. And I would encourage anyone who's in church leadership to read through the Pauline epistles and notice, highlights, underline how many times he's talking about the divides that exist between us. And usually he's talking about ethnicity, of course, not race, because it was made up later. But these ethnic divides, he's constantly helping these church groups of 30, 40, 50 people navigate the obvious pain that comes with diversity, right? He's always talking about it. Why is he always talking about it? Because those small church gatherings in homes were diverse, and there were these cultures smashing into each other, which is why much of the New Testament is pastors writing to their people saying what? Forgive one another, be long-suffering with one another, bear one another's burdens. It's why these pastors are constantly telling their people, if you're in Christ, then these old divisions are secondary and tertiary. They're not primary. And somehow in the American church, we lost it. And I think that that's a systemic form of injustice. And it's a systemic form of racism, even though I don't know any pastor right now who's intending to do that. It's just kind of happening to us because it's in the bones of the nation.
It's in the water that we swim in, the air that we breathe, right?
It's the most normal thing in the world, right?
A friend of ours said this on one of our lives the other day. He said, we literally have an office in the church that was instituted because of issues of racism or issues of division over ethnicity, right? The deacons, because we had the widows who weren't getting what they needed.
Right. Yep.
And so then this whole office is instituted to deal with the issue.
Yeah.
Like literally over issues of clashing because of ethnicity. Like we literally see an office in the church instituted. Man, that's a profound point. I've never thought about, and it's interesting you say that. So even me as a POC, person of color, I've never thought about the reality that like all these things are being said because there's this meshing of people together happening in the gospel, right? That we've never seen before. And so they're writing these texts to say, yo, like, you guys got to figure out how to live together. You guys got to figure out how to put this stuff down. You guys got to figure out to love one another, bear one another's burdens, dwell with each other in unity in the spirit and the bond of peace. All these different types of things that we're seeing happen. Man, that's good, bro. Like,
and you don't have to write that stuff if people don't naturally hate each other.
It's true. That's
right?
good.
Like you don't need to put pen to paper if everyone's cool and harmonious. Like these pastors are writing to churches that are having race riots, if I can be so bold. They're having ethnic fights. The circumcision conversation is right in line with what we're talking about here. That's why they had to put pen to paper, man.
And that's the thing, right? So, and I think this is an important thing to hit on as well. I think there's a lot of people out there that would say, well, yeah, you're right. This is just an issue. It's just a sin issue, right? And so the only way we can solve it is if Jesus changes everybody's hearts. So shut up and stop talking about it and pray that Jesus would change everybody's hearts, right? Or
Yeah.
justice won't be done until God comes back or judges everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so like there's kind of this idea almost pitted in the church, to be honest, that like, hey, until God comes back and deals with it, you're just gonna have to deal with it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Until he comes and fixes sin, then you're just gonna have to just wait.
Yeah, that's the war cry of the apathetic. Um, just read the teachings of Jesus like 10 times in a row and tell me how you come to that conclusion. So here's the gem, right? There's the biblical gospel and then there's the distorted American gospel. The American gospel is if you say the prayer, you get to go to heaven when you die.
Hmm.
And so the songs that we sing about are in the sweet by and by, when we all get to heaven, what a day that will be. And we've shifted our focus from my responsibility in the here and now to behave like Jesus did and to live his way right now. We've shifted our focus to where do I go when I die? And the American church, not everybody, but there's a unique stream in the Western church, especially, that's now being exported all over the world, that says the message of the gospel is if you pray the prayer, you go to heaven when you die. And so the focus is this isn't going to be fixed until we all get to heaven. What we fail to see is the amount of hands-on ministry that Jesus did to right social wrongs and injustices. And the first disciples of Jesus naturally started doing the work of ministry. You mentioned it, right? In the book of Acts, feeding the Greek widows, that's social justice work. They did it right away. Like they saw the feeding of the 5,000. They're like, we got to keep doing that. And it's a distorted gospel to say, the primary focus of my salvation is I get to go to heaven when I die, which, by the way, Jesus never said.
That's
The
good.
phrase "go to heaven when you die" is nowhere in the Bible. If you read the teachings of Jesus and think that's what he's saying, reread it again and talk to somebody about it.
So what would you say? Because I think here's another thing that happens. What would you say when people say, there might be people that hear this and say, "Oh, okay, we're just a bunch of liberal leftists, right? Social justice warriors."
Yeah.
And so we politicize this issue, and we make it
Yeah.
an issue of politics. We make it an
Mhm.
issue of, well, you're just a Democrat, and you just want to corrupt our nation with your democratic progressive ideas.
Yeah, if a person believes that humbling oneself and seeking first to understand before we seek to be understood, and seeking reconciliation across social divisions, if a person believes that that is political and not the gospel, I would just encourage them to reread the teachings of Jesus. Here's another thing too. If you just look over the 2.5 centuries of our nation, what is considered political shifts all the time. And so we have to anchor the conversation around race and racial reconciliation in the gospel. The fact that right now a political party or persuasion is choosing to care about an issue does not mean that I should not. And here, let me give you an example. Up until 2015, caring for refugees was not a political issue. We've done sermons about it at Desert Springs. Nobody screams and pulls their hair out and says you're getting political. But then a politician decided to make caring for refugees political. And now you're getting all political because we're talking about an issue that some politician wanted to leverage. Taking care of the poor is a Jesus issue before it's a Republican or Democrat issue. We need to recognize that we are citizens first of the kingdom of God and live our lives accordingly, regardless of what the kingdoms of this world choose to care about or leverage. And so I would just encourage you, if you're concerned about giving people the impression that you're a political party that you don't like, take that up with Jesus and ask him if he cares.
I think it was Timothy
Doesn't
Keller.
seem to.
I think it was Timothy Keller who said it best, right? When asked what political party do Christians fit in, and he just said they don't.
They don't. That's why in empirical regimes they get put to death. It's also why when Christians Christians are in power, it just really looks so different. It gets so distorted and bloated that it's almost unrecognizable what you see in the text and then what you see lived out. And then you see Jesus' name being used on, to justify war crimes, for goodness sakes.
And that's where we find ourselves today, right? We find ourselves in a position of power, right? As a church, the church in general finds itself in a position of power and using that power. And that wasn't what the institution was intended for, right? And so as a consequence, like you said, everything's bloated, everything's distorted. We've missed the heart of what it means to be a Christian entirely. And so I think I have a couple more things for you.
Sure.
So as a white pastor who, there may be other white pastors who happen to listen to this, who are maybe processing through this issue, what would you tell them to do? And then what would you tell white brothers and sisters who are trying to process through what's happening in our world right now and be open and understand?
Yeah. Man, I think I could talk about this for days. And by the way, I'm glad to talk to anybody who wants to continue this conversation one-on-one or whatever. So if you guys want to share my contact info, I would love to have a conversation about it. Here's what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't just go find a person of color and start asking them questions. That's tokenizing an image bearer of God, and nobody likes that, right? It's exhausting. It's not kind. Please don't do that. You can read, at least I assume. I know that the Real Talk listener base is an educated, smart bunch. And so get a book. I would highly recommend, man, there's kind of the dip your toe in, there's the shallow end, and then there's the deep end. I would encourage you to use a biblical phrase, gird up your loins and just jump in the deep end. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable and awkward and feeling silly. I think that many times, especially leaders, we're afraid to move forward into a space because we feel uncomfortable about it or uncertain about how, if we say the wrong thing, if we do the wrong thing, and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Here's what I would tell you. If you go to the gym and you're not sweating at the end of it and your muscles aren't hurting, you're not doing it right. And if you're entering into the conversation around race and racism in America and you're not sweating and your soul is aching and your mind is feeling overwhelmed, then you're not doing it right. Because this is a 401 year baked into the bones evil in our country. You're not going to understand it in one book or 1 month. Give your life over to this. If you're an American, this is to some degree, there's a unique nature of this that is American. And so give your life over to it. Make a commitment to yourself in your leadership to just like, if you're a preacher, if you preach on every year, if you say, oh, I'm going to make sure we talk about family. I'm going to make sure we talk about marriage. Make sure that as part of a natural diet in your leadership, you are not only learning about, but you're also teaching about race, racial reconciliation, bigotry. And I don't just mean a sermon on MLK Day. I mean as normal applications of the text. And if you want a great example, read the Apostle Paul and how he weaves it in all over the place. A place to start if you want to get in the deep end would be to read the book or watch the Amazon Prime series Color of Compromise by Jamar Tisby. If you've not read up on the history of racism in America, I highly recommend that book. He specifically follows the thread line through the church. And so if you've been to seminary, you might come to find out for the first time ever that some of the people that you read in seminary owned slaves, but our seminary professors didn't include that in the curriculum. And so to have that paradigm shift and recognize that history is much more complex and messed up than we give it credit for. Also, for those of you that are having this conversation with kids, there's a book that I highly recommend, God's Very Good Idea. So for those of you that lead in children's ministry, those of you who have kids, Trillia Newbell, God's Very Good Idea is super helpful. And then I would say commit yourself to sitting under the teaching of people of color for the rest of your life. And so podcasts, books, visiting churches, going to conferences that in where you're the racial minority, and just making it a part of your natural diet, your natural consumption of information, and who you're allowing to teach you. I found, as I took an inventory of all of my leadership books, I lead a church family here. I've got a staff and a huge volunteer team. I found that all of the leadership books I was reading and all the leadership podcasts I was following were all white males. And that shaped my leadership style into conflict with different cultural values that people of color in the congregation that I serve had. And it was like this awakening of like, I'll give you a great example. If you lead an organization, you know this. When does the meeting start? Because the calendar says it starts at 11, but I've got certain folks on my leadership team that are strolling in at 11:10, 11:15, because we have different cultural perspectives on time. But the books I was reading was saying, if they're not on time, you got to do disciplinary action. You got to coach them through it or whatever. And so just to open your mind to leadership books and leadership podcasts from other leaders, making sure that you're hearing from people of color in all aspects of life. And for those of us that are in majority culture, take the command of Jesus seriously, to humble yourself and to listen.
That's good, man. I mean, it makes me think about something Alex said to me a couple weeks back. We were talking and he was like, man, if you don't turn up to somebody's house unannounced, you don't care about him in his culture. And I'm like, damn,
Yeah.
that's a great point. And I know
Yeah,
that
dude.
like all of my white friends, if I turned up at their house unannounced,
Woo.
they'd be salty as hell. Like, what are
Oh
you
my
doing,
gosh.
fool? Like, I
Yep.
got a schedule. I'm doing something right now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, there's just certain things that we don't value that other cultures value. I was having this conversation with John because we were dialoguing about family. Our families live together, and his family had gone out for an evening by themselves. And he was talking to me the next day, and we were just catching up. Like, how was last night? Did you guys have fun? He was like, yeah, man, we had a great time. It was just so refreshing, blah, blah, blah. I was like, man, that's white people stuff, bro. You know what I'm saying? And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, and here's what's cool. He didn't get upset by me saying that. He was like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. And I was like, well, for me, like, I get excited when people come together.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, damn, I get excited when we get to seclude ourselves.
Mm.
And I was like, and it was just a moment we were having where he was like, yo, like, this is crazy that I value this thing, that I value removing myself from people that aren't my people. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you can do that, and you can do that in American spaces, right? You can do that when you live in America. In other countries, your grandparents live with you. You know, you have an uncle who lives with you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like that's just normal for you.
Yeah.
Where here in America, it's like you
Very
go by your own house. Individualistic, perfect word. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
we're all homesteaders, cowboys.
Yep.
Living on the range. Yeah, my wife's Sicilian, and it's that way. They were from Sicily. They went to Brooklyn, and everybody lives on top of each other.
Yep.
So the idea of like a nuclear family, mom, dad, 2 kids going to dinner by themselves is like,
Just
why would
crazy.
you? What is going on?
Yeah. Why would you? There's something wrong with you if you do that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, something's up. Yep.
That's crazy. So, 2 more things. When I think about, obviously, we focus on engaging Gen Z. When I think about Generation Z, um, and I see what they're doing right now, I see the responses they're having on social. That they're really paying attention to what's going on. They're really paying attention to the things that people older than them are saying. And I think as a consequence, and I think a lot of church leaders, people who are leading organizations, people who are in positions of power, you got to, like, you may not understand right now, but they're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if they see that you're silent, complicit, or proactive
100%.
in your siding on this issue in terms of like, hey, this is a non-issue at all, you're gonna lose these kids completely.
Yep.
110%. They're done.
Absolutely.
And so I guess the thing I'm trying to think through right now, and I wanted to get your opinion on it, is there any hope that Gen Z can do a way better job at dealing with this issue than we can?
Yeah. So I'm not a sociologist or a statistician, so I don't. I'll just give you my gut. So the generations before us moved the ball to where it is now, and I think for my generation, Generation X, we can move the ball forward, but it'll probably be my kids' generation, which I don't think has been named yet.
I think it's Alpha. They call them Alphas.
Alpha. Okay, well that sounds cooler than Gen X. I think that they'll be able to score the touchdown. So if I can stick with the metaphor, if I had to guess, the generations before us, so you take like the silent generation and the boomer generation, people of color couldn't get mortgages. People of color, obviously, segregation, Jim Crow, and the ball got moved forward, and the civil rights movement moved the ball forward. And then we had, in the 90s, you had what seemed to be maybe some steps back with the war on drugs. And again, this is that shape shifting, right, of that demonic force. And then, you had the King riots and in the 90s, and the ball got moved forward. I think you had a radical elevation of people of color's voices in the national conversation through that period, moved the ball forward. So for instance, I grew up listening to Black people sing rap music. That changed. That had a huge impact on my generation.
Yeah.
I remember, Tupac, and that moved the ball forward, right? That would have been unheard of 30 years prior. And we're not close to where we need to be, but we're closer, I think. And so if I think about in terms of generations, I'm encouraging every pastor that I come into contact with. I think here's the deal. It's a 401 year disease that's not going to get fixed in a couple of months because we all read a book. We don't even I don't even know the hidden areas of my heart in which racism still has a stronghold. And it's going to be a lifetime of repentance and introspection and reconciliation because I was born into the diseased infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so I think, my children's generation might be able to score the touchdown, because we're still dismantling this demonic force and the walls of division that have been set up and reinforced. But I want to encourage every leader, don't you think, don't fall into the trap of thinking that we're going to do it. We need to be part of the solution. But the demon that we're facing is going to come out by prayer and fasting and a move of the Spirit that will likely take generations. And I think non-individualistic cultures get that. I think as individualists, we want it our way right away. And we think that we can just pass some legislation and then poof, it's gone. It's in our bones, man. So it'll take a couple of generations of repentance and reconciliation, I think.
Man, that's good. Thank you. I was going to ask you another question, but you already answered it. So,
boom, dude, pro status.
With that,
that's the real talk.
Hey, let them know. With that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing a part of your story. Obviously, coming from where you came from and the things you experienced as a young man and how that's translated in today. And now seeing what you're doing, being your friend, knowing you is pretty stinking cool. So just want to say I appreciate you, man. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much, Jordan and Alex. I really appreciate and it's just an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
All right. Well, that is the RLTK PHX podcast, episode 33 in the books. You'll find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, RLTK PHX. This is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. So hopefully this was fodder for you, something that you could digest and it could move you forward. Like Caleb said, and I know we've said before countless times, man, if you want to continue to engage us through social, engage us through email, whatever. This is what we're here for. We love you guys and we will talk to you again soon. Peace.